What you're about to hear is an excerpt from the Off Topical podcast with Ike Doherty. Ike Doherty is the founder of Lispy Snake Limited, which is an open source development company. They're creating open source software, including a game engine and a game. So if you like what you're hearing here, head over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/offtopical, and you can subscribe to the full podcast over there. So are you talking about like what kind of game you're actually developing while you're doing the engine too?
Yeah, let me just bring up my documents because we have those now.
Nice.
So a lot of people won't be aware of the company structure, but long story short, Ryan Sipes has recently come on board as an advisor, and we've been, discussing a few game mechanics and the background story. I guess the easiest way that you could quickly describe the game, although it would be somewhat inaccurate. The game we have in mind is sort of Battlestar Galactica universe, not the games. Like if you think of the BSG universe, kind of meets Homeworld-ish, would be nice. The closest way to describe it.
So like
what we want to
Ronald
do
D. Moore
is...
Battlestar?
Sorry?
Ronald D. Moore Battlestar, or the older one?
We can go with that one. I'll allow that one, yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we kind of want to do is, it's a game that has to have depth. As I said earlier on, I'm more about content and depth than I am on visuals. That's sort of why 2D strikes a chord with me.
Yeah.
What we're more thinking is a game that at first feels, this is going to sound stupid, at first it's going to feel like your typical cheesy 80s style almost space battle game. You've got your typical hero character and everything feels a bit like an 80s space sim, and you have your main character and he's been set up in some kind of situation, and it all feels a bit cheesy, but over time the game will, the universe of the game will start to corrupt. So what will at first feel like your typical cheesy 80s title is slowly going to develop strains that you wouldn't find in other games. So characters will have certain traits based on where the story is going. So the decisions you make in the story will affect the outcome, as well as having permanent death for crew members as an option. Crew members also having traits like depression and substance abuse. So it's going to get quite twisted quite early on, and what we're looking at is creating situations that force you to evaluate the human condition. I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but that the way that we're going to achieve that is, kind of build people's hope up as they're going through the game, and then rip that hope back down again and leave you with that one little shred to climb through to the next part of the gameplay. That's sort of the goal here, and to have realistic relationships that are quite gritty. To put the characters in a spot that they might make decisions that you would otherwise disagree with, but you're forced to rethink about it because of the situation. So in terms of a game, it's going to be very, very story-led, but there will be some interesting mechanics along the way, such as being able to board somebody else's ship. It won't just be, the top-down style of ships. We're looking at some point to have actual on-the-ground mechanics as well, which would probably be something like 2D side scroll, but at least you'll have the option to see those characters and, have some kind of feeling about them, as opposed to being an avatar on screen that comes up with a bit of text. So we're going for a slightly corrupted approach to, the 80s space game.
That's really cool. That's like super exciting to me. So I played this game, Space-Based DF9. Did you ever play that?
I'm not sure. I'm one of those people. I'm terrible with names.
Yeah, so it was like a game that was created by Double Fine, and it was kind of like a space-based simulator, and it was really cool. It was really fun, and like there was a lot of potential, but it never left like an early access state, and there were things in that game that like remind me of what you're talking about. Like there were interpersonal things that could go on. There wasn't like addiction and substance abuse and stuff like that, but that sounds like super compelling, and that has me really excited. I can't wait to get my hands on this. So is it like a side scroller? Is it more like a 3/4 top down perspective kind of thing, or what kind of like?
For now, we're looking at like a pure top down perspective. We're looking to, at the moment, we've got an artist that we're talking to. When they feel a bit more comfortable and things are further on, we'll ask them to do a blog post or introduce themselves and show the mock-ups. There's a specific style that we're fighting over, not fighting, like internally we're deciding over. On the one hand, everybody loves a hipster pixel, but on the other hand, I think we all love what I would call lush retro. That's when you see something in a retro style, but it's got a certain beauty and elegance to it, but infused with, a Blade Runner visual.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of more the look we're going for. So if you can sort of picture that in your mind, with even though like it's very bright and vibrant, it's very dark and depressing at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's sort of again, everything's got like a mixed sort of corruption is the best way to describe the balance we're going for in the game. So yeah, if you can imagine that sort of visual from a top-down view when you're, space combat and between different planetary bodies, but then you would have sort of a side scroller element which I'm hoping would feel a little bit golden axy, but in a way that people like when you're down on the ground. So
that's awesome. Wow. So
be confident. That's why I'm working on the camera part of the engine now to support different perspectives.
Right. So when you say like the retro pixel look, are you talking like high resolution pixel art, or are you talking like 8-bit, or are you talking about something more akin to like Transistor or Bastion or something like that, where it's like it has a retro feel and retro gameplay, but it also has like modern high resolution graphics?
Yeah, I mean that's what I would definitely describe as like a lush retro feel. Like it looks amazing, but it feels very old worldy. Yeah. And that's at the moment that's kind of winning in my mind over your typical 8-bit palette and hipster pixel. So like there's a bit of a fight going on internally, but whichever way it works, whatever look it ends up with, it's going to be more about how the story unfolds and how because you don't want something that's entirely linear, but you do want to feel a sense of progression throughout the story. You don't want this. You can have a world that's too open. You kind of do need to cap what choices can be made and still allow that branching to happen naturally. So it's hard to get that balance right, but it's going. I mean, I'm not quite sure which style is going to win right now, but again, the gameplay and the story are going to be far more important than the visual style,
right?
And that's kind of our.
Yeah, and that's like the thing is like games are great, from a visual standpoint, but visuals can't stand on their own, and you really need to have a solid core game loop in order to be worthy of people spending their time and especially their money on a game. So that's a commendable stance to take. All right, so now you're doing something very interesting with the way that you're trying to fund the development here. Can you talk about how you're planning on funding this?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways. Well, initially there was one way of funding this, and that was, feedback investment from the outcome of our own contract work. And that's great, but that is slow going. We're getting to the end of the year. And if you ever worked in the industry, which you have as well, you know how tax years link into this.
Yeah.
So the other thing doing it is we want this game, and I'm pretty sure there's other people out there want that game. And there's people that know myself, know Ryan, and potentially know the artist that we're speaking to as well, and know of the work we've all done in the past, and would like to see us all together creating this. So we decided that one of the ways we could do this is a kind of crowdfunding opportunity without the issues associated with Indigo and Kickstarter. And there is a certain publishing website that will take a hell of a lot of your revenue, so we won't even discuss that guy. So the way that we want to do it, you buy a license from us, and that is a lifetime license for all 2D titles that we ever make. Now, yeah, I'm being fair, there is a distinction. This is for all 2D titles. I don't see 3D in our future, but if it does happen, that's going to be that's going to be a lot of upscaling in the company to support that, modelers, artists, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about all 2D titles we ever make. You will have lifetime access to digital copy. We're issuing a lifetime license key. Interestingly, to issue that key, we had to create an open source bit of software, which we've since released, called LBRY license, that uses libuid and an SQL database to give you a UUID. And that's written in Go. So it's $20. You buy that, we send you a license key, that is yours for life. Let's not get into the whole 100-year debate there. Whatever we do, that's yours. So once we get ready for the point of our first release, we're going to bring up an account service online. You just plug your UID back into it and boom, you've got an activated license. You'll have your typical digital download area where you can just download the content. So that would be literally yours for life. Any game that we ever make this 2D is yours. And we decided to limit how many of those we issue because we want this to be, as cliche as it sounds, we want it to be a bit of a special startup phase, like it's a select few. So there's only 1,000 licenses that we are issuing in this stage, and that will help in terms of funding bits, not really much the development work because, hey, this is my job, but in terms of funding other people that need to be involved, artists, testing, anything that we're going to need for the game, that's feeding back into it. And, the flip side of that is, the engine is going to be open sourced. So you are funding technically the development of that engine. So you're investing in open source by doing that. But kickback is you get games from us for life when we make them, when we release them. So it's a hybrid crowdfunding approach. But we hope people like it, and we're trying to keep on top of things with the blog. Obviously, we've got other duties as well, and I'm really bad at updating websites. But we've been updated, showing people what we're doing. We showed up on Twitter early on, and there's a blog post where we got 10,001 sprites rendering on screen simultaneously, moving 10,000 of them by clicking the mouse, and moving one by moving the mouse at 60 frames per second on 4K, and that was just on my Dell XPS 13. So, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Right, and that's we've done any kind of game development, about ECS, the Entity Component System. So the engine has that in place at the moment as the typical workflow the game developers expect, especially indie game devs. So we've made that the primary focus for now. But in parallel, we're looking at our next pipeline, because we're just using STL renderer for now to bootstrap this project, and then we'll start switching to dedicated 3D pipeline. But as well as having ECS, you're going to have a more data-driven way of doing rendering in future. So a lot of the work has gone in the last few days has been about cache locality. We have large dynamic arrays of pack structs that are texture handles, so we can ensure we can have sequential lookups very, very rapidly in memory to access our texture objects and then do the blend of the sprites. So we're making it like hella efficient.
Yeah.
So people, like abreast of all the changes we're making, putting the videos up, and so it's going to be a fun journey anyway, because we're trying to hit this problem of how do you make a AAA quality game engine from typical open source components, and then allow indie game devs to leverage that, because it didn't exist for us. So we want that to exist for other people as well, because we all wanted to make that, that little hobby game in our spare time with that nice camera shake effect or a bit of lighting, but you couldn't do it without going with a pro license or another bit of proprietary software that doesn't actually properly run on Linux. So it's a challenge, but this crowdfunding opportunity is an opportunity for everyone to be involved in that part of that journey. And the payoff is everybody gets this engine, and those who really want it will have this game. And we're really, really, really happy and confident about where this game is going. And I think other people like the idea of it because it's a novel approach to game development. It's a novel approach to the story arcs in a game as well. There's only so many times you can go around doing headshots in 4K before it becomes a little bit cyclical and a little bit dry. So we're hoping use the 2D medium to be more expressive, and I really hope that people get that and want to be part of that.
Definitely. So where can people learn more about your project and what you're doing, and how can people support you?
Yeah, just head to lispysnake.com, which is lispysnake.com. You'll have a landing page there which immediately has a link to the Game Raiser campaign, which is what we've called this crowdfunding campaign. You can also refer it as to Game Raiser if you're that way inclined, which You can read our about there, and you got links to our GitHub and our Twitter. We've got a couple of things up on our GitHub already. We've got libls, which is a fork of my old project, which was libuf, which is a C utility library. So that's growing with the engine, which is growing with the game, and there's a feedback cycle between them. We wanted a lightweight, portable, modern C library for basic data types. So hash maps, lists, dynamic arrays, having auto-free functionality as you unwind the stack, so making C much more tolerable, and that's become the foundation of our game engine. Next to go in there is thread pools and like routine-ish functionality, but while focusing on the fact that it is actually still threading. That's up in there. Our website's up in there, which is created using Hugo, again, open source tool. You're welcome to hack on our website or fork it, modify it for your needs. Everything is going up on there in time. Some stuff is still kept under lock and key, just to avoid. There's going to be a lot of API changes. We don't want people to rely on the engine before we know it's in a shippable form.
Right. That's
the only reason it's click on GitHub right now, because if you get too early an adoption into that engine while it hasn't met our needs, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
And it has to be in a game engine that will meet our needs. So as we're a bit further along towards around about the time of our first technical demo, which, the more support we get, the quicker we can get that out, then that will be open sourced and under a permissive license. Not that we take any social stance one way or the other, but we describe ourselves as an open source company, not a free software company. We are not socially or politically inclined. Open source is a great workflow for us. We love being involved in the community aspect of it, and we believe it works best for our company, but we're not aligned politically with any single viewpoint. And to us, the most important thing you can have is the freedom to make your own decisions. So take as you will.
Right on, right on. What you just heard is an excerpt from the Off Topical podcast. Head over to offtopical.net or youtube.com/offtopical to get the full episode of this show.